does language develop in stages? So you mentioned critical period, and
Mhm,
then in middle period puberty, then afterwards.
mhm.
Um, does language develop like in these concrete fashions of like in these periods of years, or is it kind of like a Piagetian stage where like it kind of goes through some type of incremental
Well, Piaget
improvement?
was wrong, about just about everything,
Yeah.
right? Just so there are no Piagetian stages, not even in cognitive development, right? That's just, yeah, there aren't any. So, and there aren't any in language either. I mean, what there is, which is interesting, is that there within the first couple of years of life, and it's unclear whether this is because this is what infants' lives are like, or whether this is what infants' brains are like, or right. There's a fairly systematic unfolding of language, and it happens in a pretty similar way for most kids, right? So if you're looking at phonological development, we know that it begins in utero, the last trimester, last 3 months of pregnancy. Um, uh, if they're not deaf, babies can hear, and they actually start parsing out language. We know that in the first 6 months, we know what most babies are more or less capable of, which is a broad spectrum analysis of the sounds that they're hearing. They actually operate much like mammals. They seem to be drawing on some kind of mammalian sound system. We know that between the ages of 6 and 12 months, they narrow and become specialists in their native
Right.
language sounds. So by the time they're roughly 12 months of age, they are way better at hearing distinctions among their own language sounds, but way worse at hearing distinctions among sounds that are outside of their languages. Um, that seems to be generically true. I mean, the thing is, that seems to be like how like just how whatever the brain processes are that analyze sounds. That's how long they take. That's the speed with which they work. Um, and so that, I mean, like I say, obviously there's some variability. There's actually Pat Cool has done some interesting work on like, well, are the kids who are like, a month or so ahead of the game, does that predict better word learning? And it kind of maybe does. Right. But it's all within that zone. A kid who took, frankly, even until like 15 months or 18 months to figure this out, everyone would be like, ooh, that's weird and a problem. That said, there's also the fun fact, right, that even though kids sort of like narrow down by the age of 12 months, that's well within the critical period. And if you pick that kid up and you move them to a new country and give them exposure to a new language, they'll do it again. Like they're not spent. Pick them up at the age of 13 to a new country and do it, and they'll do it badly, right? That's why people have foreign accents. Because it's really hard to redo it. Apparently, really not that hard in the first 4 or 5 years of life. At some point, it becomes very, very difficult. But that
Okay.
unfolds in a very regular process. I mean, people talk about like milestones in language development, right? Most kids learn to start saying their first words roughly around 1 year, but they understand words as early as 6 months. Babbling starts around 6 months. Um, Kids start putting their first words together after they have roughly 50 words, which most kids get roughly around between in the ballpark of 18 months. They can produce 50 words, and that's about the time you'll want to start putting them together, right? Then, so you get the 2 word stage. So there's some stuff that happens in a fairly regular fashion, but it's unclear whether that's because when part of that seems to be what the brain does, part of that's got to be something like how long it takes you to learn something. Like, it takes you a lot longer to learn to get good at saying the first 50 words than it does to get good at saying the second 50 words.
Hmm.
Uh, so there's like an acceleration that happens. Um, but that's why it makes sense to talk about, like, I mean, we actually do have norms and standards. What does a typical 3-year-old do? What can a typical 5-year-old do? And those make sense. This isn't a free for all where it's like, well, some kids are here and some kids are there. There's obviously ranges, but there's a lot of regularity.
Yeah, so like there's a normal distribution to like how kids learn and all that. Okay,
Yep.
great.